Let me talk about the moratorium demand, because when we develop this demand, first of all, what is a moratorium? A moratorium is essentially an injunction on foreclosure. It's a law that says that because we have an emergency, it's an emergency measure that says because we have an emergency, we're going to put a halt on foreclosures, because the first thing when people are facing foreclosures to put them in a position of fight is to keep them in their homes. We do that in litigation. We use every technique we can, because the longer we can keep people in their homes, the better chance we have of fighting those banks and wearing them down. And a moratorium is an immediate emergency measure geared toward meeting an emergency crisis. The moratorium bill that we studied in the 30s, which was similar to 25 other states' bills, provided that if you were facing foreclosure, you could go to court. There was an automatic stay placed on the foreclosure. In Michigan, it lasted for 5 years. 5 years during the Depression. And a judge was mandated to set a reasonable payment based on your ability to pay. Gee, it's totally logical. Like Sandra says, we raise it to people and it makes total sense because they understand it. You're throwing people out of their homes, you're destroying the community. Keep people in their homes, you stabilize things. Everyone understands it except the banks and the politicians. The moratorium bills that were won in the 30s were not won because we had enlightened legislatures compared to now, or an enlightened Supreme Court. I'll talk about that decision. They were won because in the 1930s, the working class was organized. It was led, there was a strong Communist Party and Socialist Party, and they organized unemployed councils in almost every neighborhood. And we've all seen, if you've read Labor's Untold Story or even seen Grapes of Wrath, what happened? When an eviction occurred, when people were being thrown out of their homes, the neighborhood came out. And when that bailiff put it out in the street, they moved it back in. So the moratorium was not won primarily through the legislature, it was won through the struggle. It was won on the street, it was implemented, and finally, after it was implemented through direct action, finally the legislature passed the bills to ratify what the people were doing in the street. And isn't that how any progressive thing happens for the people? How were the unions formed? They weren't formed because they teach us about the NRA. They were formed in Michigan when the workers took over the plants. And that's how they were formed. How was Social Security won? By the people organized. How was Civil Rights won? It was won because people sat in. They implemented desegregation and forced the legislature to recognize that implementation and started saying, if you ain't going to do it, we're going to start doing a little more than that. That's how a moratorium will be won. And we run through action. And we believe it's still the fundamental demand. It's not the total solution. We know that. We believe there should be a liquidation of the debt. We need to nationalize it. There's a lot of long-term ideas. But to fight back, when you're losing your home, you got to keep people in it so they can fight. You need to stabilize it. It's an emergency measure. Now, in analyzing the law, when we looked at it in Michigan, after we looked at the precedent for the 30s, we looked at the Michigan statute. And in Michigan, as in virtually every state has a statute like this. It allows the governor, or sometimes it's the legislature, to declare a state of emergency. It's usually implemented when there's a flood or tornado. What happens? The governor declares a state of emergency, and there's all sorts of emergency stuff that happens. But every bill, and we studied them, applies not just to a natural disaster, but also to a man-made or to a corporate-made disaster. And that's what we said, that the governor has the authority under the law. In Michigan, the bill was MCL 10.31, but I'll bet you that in every state that's here, there's a similar bill to declare a state of emergency. And now once you declare a state of emergency, you have the power, you're effectuated with the power to do whatever is necessary to meet that emergency. And we confronted the governor the first time. She had a big town hall meeting and say how bad things were. We went in, she asked, what would you do? We got up and said, what we would do is declare a state of economic emergency, put the workers ahead of the banks, and put a moratorium on foreclosures, evictions, and utility shutoffs.
That's right.
And make no mistake. In the 30s, they'll tell you it's illegal, it can't be done. That's what she's been saying for the last 3 years. And we have her on tape when she said, why? She really can't do it because the banks wouldn't like it. In fact, in the 1930s, there were some people from Minnesota because it was the Minnesota Florida case that was a critical case that challenged the moratorium bill. The finance industries went into court, and there was a historic decision. It's called Home Loan Association versus Blaisdell. And in that decision, again, under the pressure of the struggle, the Supreme Court affirmed that a moratorium on foreclosures is legal under the law of Michigan, under the law of the U.S., because, again, as Abayumi said, the people's right to survive supersedes the contract clause of the Constitution in a period of emergency. And we can get you that bill, it's on our website, but in that case, it's still good law. It's never been overturned. It's law now, and there's no reason why every governor and President Obama is not declaring a state of economic emergency and implementing a moratorium. It takes a flick of a pen. A flick of a pen is all it would take, or will. Let me just say a couple of words about where the crisis is at today, because I think it's very important. You know, we all know about the big bailout to the banks and the $700 billion bailout. And there have been a lot of headlines, oh, some of the banks are actually paying back the money and, oh yeah, everything's working out on that. But that's a bunch of load of crap. The banks that are paying back the TARP money, bailout money they receive, are paying it back so they can basically pay the executives $30 million instead of the $1 million they're limited to. But the real bailout continues with almost every single foreclosure that takes place. Because one of the things that happened over the last few years is what I call a federalizing of the mortgage industry. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac now back up more than half of the mortgages in the U.S. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are part of the U.S. government. They were taken over in 2008. Last year, 30% of mortgages were underwritten, were backed up by HUD, by FHA. Of course, FHA is the government. What does it mean when the mortgage is backed up by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac? What happens is, City Mortgage may own your mortgage, but when they foreclose on your home, say your home is a $200,000 loan for a home that's now maybe worth $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000. When they foreclose on your home, Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae pays City Mortgage the full $200,000, then dumps the home for $30,000 or $40,000, and who picks up the difference? We pick up the difference. We pick up the difference for our tax dollars. This is what I call kind of a silent bailout that continues every day with virtually every single foreclosure. It was finally acknowledged in an article last Sunday in the New York Times that said that the losses, this bailout is approaching $359 billion that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are paid out to bail out the banks. Then what happens? If you go to 36th District Court up the block, who evicts you from your home? The government does. Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac is the evicting party. What a crock. It says why the government has the authority right now at a national level to declare a moratorium on all these foreclosures, because it's the government that actually is backing up almost all the loans. And we need to publicize this. It's not known about. And it's hard for people to get, but it's the daily bailout. Virtually every foreclosure is a bailout to the banks, and we say, hell with that. Why are you bailing out the banks? Bail out the people. Instead of giving out $200,000 on a loan that the banks overvalue deliberately, why don't you give that homeowner $30,000 so they can stay in their home instead of kicking